Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, and above me on the screen, my co-host, Joe Clark. Joe, we won't go too deep into our brackets because nobody cares, but just who's your winner?
I got Michigan taking it home.
Michigan. Okay, I always go Arizona. They have not won in I don't know how long. It's been a long time. My brother went there, so I know nothing about college basketball, but I think Arizona was pretty good this year. My
They were.
understanding is they were undefeated until pretty late in the season, so I like my chances better than usual this time. Um, in terms of Steelers topics, though, the topic of this show, we're going to dive into three of the biggest topics of the week. The latest signings from free agency. We'll talk about those, how they fit on the roster. Then we're going to dive into updated draft priorities with free agency and trades that have taken place and some of the departures, people who have left the team. The Steelers' draft picture looks a little different than it did just a few weeks ago, and so we're going to talk about that and debate some of the positions that I think are worth debating, that are kind of controversial or questionable at least. Finally, we'll go on to the pre-draft interest of the Steelers. That is the pro day visits and meetings and the pre-draft top 30 visits that have happened so far, and try and talk about any patterns worth mentioning. Diving into the latest signings, safety Jaquan Brisker. Let's start there. I think he's an interesting one because he fills out the room to the point where I don't think they're going to have any depth issues necessarily in 2026. But where exactly does he fit? How much is he going to play? Whose snaps is he going to cut into? I mean, they signed him for $5.5 million on a one-year deal. 4.285 of that was a signing bonus. So basically all of that's, more or less paid out already. So how does he fit? And at that salary, you think this guy's probably going to play?
Yeah, I mean, I think he probably, if he's going to cut into snaps, it would really be Brandon Eccles because I think his role is going to be kind of a sub package safety where you can kind of move Jalen Ramsey down into the slot and pair him with Deshaun Elliott. They're both kind of similar safeties, Brisker and Elliott, in terms of they're more run support than coverage safeties. And I don't foresee the Steelers with how much money they're paying Jalen Ramsey have him on the bench. Elliott, I think if he comes back healthy, is a pretty good starter. So Brisker's kind of that third safety that you can rotate in sub packages and maybe move Ramsey down. Assuming you're going to keep him on the field as much as possible, given his versatility. So I like it in terms of this is a team that's really needed to stop the run. Um, the last two seasons they've kind of struggled in doing so, and now you bring in another safety, another defensive back. That's kind of his nature. He's kind of a box safety, can kind of play downhill. So I'm happy. It's low risk 1 year deal. I don't think it precludes them from taking a safety in the draft, but now it means they don't necessarily have to because they have their depth filled out. But I think he's your third safety at this point, but good guy to have in that role. He's had a decent amount of success in Chicago.
Yeah, no, just a one-year deal, like you said, probably not going to change the calculus on drafting a safety, though maybe a first-round safety you kind of lean away from just because how is that guy going to get on the field? You really want your first-rounders to be seeing the field in year one. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit with a bunch of positions because I think the Steelers did a good job of filling a lot of needs to where, the first-round pick is can be kind of like a luxury at this point. But yeah, Brisker, 4 years in Chicago. What was he initially? A second round pick, I want to say, in
Yep.
Chicago. He played all 17 games in 2025. He played only 5 in 2024. But other than 2024, he's been mostly healthy. He had a pretty solid year. Last year, 8 passes defensed, 1 interception. He's had 1 interception in each season. What else did he have? 93 total tackles, a tackle for loss. So this is a guy, he's not a super, difference maker, but he's a very solid depth slash rotational piece. I mean, to me, Brandon Eccles did a solid job in the kind of slot role last year, but being able to have somebody like Brisker, I mean, last year the Steelers were sorely missing at the beginning of the season when once Deshaun Elliott got hurt, they obviously had to scramble to find, Kyle Duggar and Juan Thornhill, that experiment didn't work out. Chuck Clark, I mean, that wasn't ideal. Brisker, raises the floor of kind of your backup safety role, which is very important. And then, also probably going to be a difference maker in the slot. Do you think he's going to outsnap Eccles in the slot?
I don't think so. I think Eccles. I mean, Eccles probably has that, at least the starting job. And when this team plays in base, it's going to be Eccles in the slot. I mean, they can move Ramsey down, but I think Ramsey's kind of settled in at safety. I assume that's what he's working at this offseason. So I would assume that he's not going to, really move down into that role as often. Maybe it can be an early down thing where, obvious rundowns, you can bring in Brisker, but I think this team's probably going to, more or less stick in base. Brisker does give him the opportunity to get creative. But yeah, I think Eccles will be the starter in the slot and will primarily play that role.
All right, moving on to Sebastian Joseph Day. The Steelers signed him, defensive tackle. He kind of started his career playing more in the middle of the defensive line and has talked about how his role expanded over the years. He's been in a couple different teams, a couple different systems. He played for the Rams initially, and then the Chargers and the 49ers, and most recently the Tennessee Titans. And he's pretty much played anywhere along the defensive line at this point. So he's another interchangeable piece that can play in the middle. He can play 0, 1, all the way out to 5. And I think he even, mentioned some experience playing 6, kind of a little bit further outside shade. So this is a guy who fits what the Steelers like in their defensive linemen. He's somewhere in the neighborhood of 6'4", 310 pounds. I don't have his arm length in front of me. Do you happen to know that, Joe?
I can look.
I would
Uh,
imagine he kind of fits that.
yeah, it was 34 and a half
Yeah, so
inches.
this is the exact prototype of what the Steelers typically add at the position. And so, this is a guy who has a lot of experience too. I think Cam Hayward talked about looking forward to, having another veteran in the room to help teach, some of the young guys, Y.A. Black, Derek Harmon, even Keanu Benton to a degree is still a young player, still figuring things out in some regard. So adding another veteran to the mix who can, kind of share those responsibilities with Hayward as a veteran mentor is a great situation. And the guy just seems like the Steelers have a lot of kind of boring people in the media when it comes to talking to the media. Sebastian Joseph Day seems like he's going to give us a good press conference or two throughout this season.
Yeah, definitely. His opening press conference was pretty fun. Talked about, he had a podcast with Mike Tyson for a while, which is kind of random, but yeah, he definitely seems like a fun personality.
Um, let's see, how much was he signed for? I have that pulled up here somewhere. His deal was also his was actually a 2-year deal, $11 million with a $4.7 million signing bonus. His year 1 base salary is $1.3 million. That year 2 base salary $5 million, and so his cap hit in year 1 much smaller. His cap hit in 2027 a little bit bigger, but that $5 million is not guaranteed, and so the Steelers would have a pretty easy out with very limited in the way of dead money. It would only be, what is that, half of that signing bonus, which is $2.35 million plus. Yeah, actually, I guess that would be it. $2.35 million would be his dead money for 2027. If the Steelers moved on, they'd have $5 million in cap savings. And so, if the Steelers say they extend Keanu Benton this offseason and Y.A. Black and Derek Harmon both progress nicely, and maybe they draft a 3rd-round defensive tackle in this year's draft. Joseph Day is a guy who, they are not necessarily tied to. This contract's very team-friendly, I think, for a veteran depth piece. And I don't know, I think he just solidifies the group overall. Joe, your thoughts on any other thoughts on Sebastian Joseph Day?
Yeah, I like it. He's a run plugger, kind of like Brisker. I like that. It gives them flexibility in the draft. Now you don't necessarily need to take a defensive lineman as early as you maybe would have if you didn't bring him in. Again, as you talked about how Brisker upgraded kind of the floor of the backups, Joseph Day upgrades the floor of the Steelers, defensive line backups. You're looking at a pretty proven player here who has produced and can stop the run and that's what they need. The defensive line room when Derek Harmon missed games last year, they've kind of struggled to replace. I mean, Isaiah Loudermilk was the first guy off the bench last year. Then he got hurt. So you have a pretty proven upgrade here, I think, in Joseph Day. And again, 2-year deal, but can get out of it after one. No real long term commitment. Doesn't preclude you from taking another defensive lineman in the draft. And we'll talk about that later. Maybe they should. But good run plugger for at least a year, and somebody that, as Hayward said and as he talked about a little bit in his opening press conference, can be a little bit of a leader in the room and help mentor the younger guys. So very good signing, not much of a financial commitment. Happy with it.
Yeah, as a guy who gets about 2 or 3 sacks a year, 40 or 50 tackles, maybe 5 or 6 tackles for loss. He's not going to be a star on the defensive line by any means, but he can absolutely start for you if you need him to, and I'd imagine he probably will start at least a few games in Pittsburgh, especially depending what happens with the progression of somebody like Y.A. Black in particular. To me, I see Sebastian Joseph Day as a similar signing to the Steelers' last couple of unfortunately kind of failed attempts to bolster the depth of the defensive line. Dean Lowry, Daniel Akwale, these kind of guys who are veterans with experience, signed at kind of a similar price point and, kind of signed with the same hope in mind. The last two, unfortunately, they had injuries, so it wasn't necessarily their fault. But, Sebastian Joseph Day, a little young, I guess, what is he? He's turning 31 tomorrow? Okay. I guess his birthday. Yeah. So he's about to be 31, but he's been fairly, healthy throughout his career for the most part. And so hopefully this one works out because the Steelers have really needed that veteran piece to work out the last couple years. And I think it's really cost them on the field with the fact that it hasn't with guys like Lowry and Akwale. All right, moving on to the draft priorities. And I think a good place to start is each of us just listing off our top 5. I didn't necessarily order mine in exact 1 through 5 order. This is just kind of the 5 positions that I would most like to see get upgraded. Then we'll talk about where we differ on our lists, and then maybe some other positions that didn't make our list but deserve mention. For me, wide receiver, guard, safety, inside linebacker, and nose tackle are my top 5. Joe, it looks like we have a couple, really just one major difference. Go ahead and read yours off.
Yeah, I have guard, wide receiver, offensive tackle, inside linebacker, and safety.
So the difference on our lists here, offensive tackle on Joe's, nose tackle on mine. And so I guess that makes sense. My only issue, I guess, because we've talked about, like, in past episodes, offensive tackle could end up being an earlier priority than expected. My thing is, since then, I think, the Broderick Jones, I think Jerry Dulac reported that he might actually end up being ready for the start of camp or?
Yeah.
So that spinal fusion that we were worried about, is Jones even going to be ready at all? So if you are drafting a tackle, I guess it's more of a future kind of development piece. It wouldn't be necessarily a year one starter. So has your thought shifted at all on tackle in terms of it being taken early, or are you still open to, a first, second, early third round tackle?
Yeah, I'm still open to taking an early round tackle, but like you said, probably more of a developmental guy. They brought in Markel Bell for a pre-draft visit. He's certainly a developmental guy. He wouldn't be ready to go. Max in Ihanacher, okay, and he's another or potential earlier round option that I could see being more of a developmental piece. Because my whole thing is like you look at it this year. Yes, you have Dylan Cook. Yes, you have Broderick Jones. If one of them, whatever one of them starts, and if they play well, they're going to probably command a lot of money on the open market. I mean, we did see a regression in the offensive tackle market this year. Rasheed Walker only got like a 1-year, $10 million deal. And I think it was Jeremy Fowler who reported it was because teams were scared away because of the deal that Dan Moore Jr. got
Oh,
last
man.
offseason. But you look at that deal Dan Moore Jr. got, and you're like, all right, if you Broderick Jones has a really strong year, he at least has that first round pedigree. I mean, even coming in, he was kind of thought to maybe be a little bit more of a developmental guy, didn't have a ton of collegiate starts. So is there a team that maybe next year we see a market correction and will pay a lot of money? And are the Steelers going to want to pay him a lot of money? Are they going to want to pay Dylan Cook a lot of money? I don't know, and I don't necessarily think so, especially if, they want to play that comp pick game. So if you take a tackle maybe in, second, third round, I'm not necessarily saying it's a first round need, but if you take a guy, you can have him sit for a year and have him ready to go. You collect a comp pick for, one of Cook, Jones, maybe both if, who knows what happens. Um, if they both somehow end up getting paid, and then you have a guy basically ready to go there. So I don't necessarily think, it's a huge need, but just playing the long game there, it's just a position that I think they could target, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if they did, especially because, the national media, there's been a little bit more buzz. Daniel Jeremiah had them taking Blake Miller in the first round. He's more of a, ready to go, plug and play right tackle. His proposal was them flipping Troy Fautano to the left side, which I think would be a bad idea. But more so that there's more buzz and then potentially addressing the trenches and addressing with an offensive tackle. So I do think it is a position that they'll probably look at within, probably during day two, maybe early day three, but definitely an intriguing one for me because it's, asked me a month and a half ago, I would have offensive tackle much lower on their list of needs.
Yeah, I think that's a good point and fair. I do wonder. I mean, Broderick Jones is 24 years old right now, which is, I mean, kind of amazing when you think about it. He's going to be, by the time he hits free agency, he's going to be 25, turning 26 in a couple of months from next March. And so, I mean, he's younger than some of these first round, or he's younger than some of these like incoming drafted players. I mean, there's a couple players with the COVID eligibility, and people are suing for extra eligibility and all these waivers and all this stuff's going on. And there's players entering the draft that are like 26 years old, which is crazy to me. But yeah, Broderick Jones is still very young. Is this a guy who, with new offensive line coach Campen in Pittsburgh, is this a guy whose career could take off? I mean, I don't think they're going to pick up his fifth year option at this point, but certainly if he has a good season, I mean, this is you can't discount the sentimental value of Broderick Jones. He was Omar Khan's first draft pick. He traded up to get him. It was kind of his first big swing. I mean, when was the last time the Steelers had traded up I guess Devin Bush, but they don't trade up often in the first round. And he kind of made that his first big move, put his rubber stamp, his name on it. And I kind of am holding out hope that Broderick Jones can come around. And I think we've written about it a fair amount on the site that he did start to come around in 2025 prior to the injury. It wasn't perfect, but he was learning how to use his hands a little bit better. He was making less mental mistakes. He had less penalties. So there was at least progress. And again, he's 24 years old. He still has, a decade in the NFL if all works out for him. So this is a guy who I don't think you want to move on from if you don't have to. And so that's the only reason I don't necessarily have offensive tackle up higher on my list, though I would not be surprised at all if it does get drafted over the first 3-4 rounds at all. And like you said, Markel Bell, somebody like that. Ihonachor is an interesting one to me. I actually compared him to Broderick Jones in the scouting report that I did. Kind of similar. He's a little older. I think he might actually be older than Jones right now, or at least similar age. But he's a guy who kind of got a late start to football. He's super, hyper athletic. He has some of the same issues with his use of hands and stuff. And so, that would be kind of an interesting replacement if they moved on from Broderick Jones and drafted Broderick Jones. But what did I include? Nose tackle. That didn't make your list. Is Sebastian Joseph Day enough? Are you just that bullish on, Benton finally turning the corner and Y.A. Black, or what's your thought process there?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a need, but I think right now they have an okay amount of depth in the room. They can bolster with another, veteran benefit contract or a late round pick for this year. I think next year, you look, it's going to be definitely a much higher on the list of needs. Who knows what Cam Hayward's future is going to be? But I mean, right now you have Benton, Hayward, Harmon, Joseph Day, Y.A. Block. Um, as right now is your top five, which isn't a bad top five. I mean, I definitely think they need more, and they definitely need more pass rush juice. And there are some nose tackles in this class that can get after the passer. So I would certainly be intrigued by one of those guys. I think you have for this season, enough of a core right now that it doesn't necessarily need to be an early need. I could see them taking one early, and I would not be upset about it whatsoever. I left it off because I just think the other positions might not, right now are just a little bit more pressing, just in terms of figuring out the current and the long term future.
I just still feel like there's a hole on the roster in terms of a just space eater big boy in the middle who only plays 15 snaps a game, but really chews up two blocks in the middle and does it effectively. I think that the Steelers would benefit from that, especially the way the NFL is trending with the run game being a big focal point on more and more offenses around the league. It's trending away from the, pass. I mean, there's still some heavy passing offenses, but more and more you're seeing, these kind of 1-2 punch running backs. You're seeing 13 personnel, more tight ends on the field, jumbo with, extra tackle. And, I really think I don't see Keanu Benton as that kind of guy, even though the Steelers have for the last few years. And I wonder if Patrick Graham or the rest of the coaching staff are looking at Benton and are kind of seeing him as being miscast in the past, because you don't have. I mean, it was always Carl Dunbar. Every time they'd bring up Benton as a nose tackle, he'd go to bat for him. Oh, we like our nose tackle. Our nose tackle's great. Y.A. Black's a more of a 4-eye, not a nose tackle. And by the end of the season, they were playing Black more in the middle. And maybe Black is the answer. Maybe they just see Black as that space eater. He's maybe a little too tall for what I would envision for somebody who can kind of get leverage and eat that space consistently. But, maybe he can develop into that. I don't know. But we both left corner off of our list, and I think that this is one of the more, I guess, debatable topics for the Steelers. I think actually Josh Carney's terrible take on Steelers Depot today is about this. He's saying a lot of the analysts seem to be trending more towards safety, less towards corner, and kind of wondering why. Joe, I'll let you have the first word.
Yeah, I left it off because you look at the Jamel Dean signing, that's a 3-year commitment. I'm assuming you're going to re-sign Joey Porter Jr. to an extension. So there's your two starting outside corners for at least 2 years. You have this year, you have Asante Samuel as depth. You have Brandon Echols in the slot. You have Jalen Ramsey, who can come and play a slot role. Um, I mean, I'm not counting on anything from James Pierre and Dante Kent, just because of, both coming off injuries, and not James Pierre, I'm sorry, Corey Trice.
Yeah.
And Corey Trice's whole career has been coming off injuries. So really, really not counting off much of anything there. Also both kind of from the old regime. But when you look at the top five, I think you have pretty solid depth right now after you sign Jamel Dean. Um, I don't think you necessarily need to take a cornerback early, and because you have Porter, I think is a number one. He's ascending corner. I think if Dean has a good year, that's a great number two. Um, can kind of figure it out next year if you have to. But as it stands for right now, I just think there's other positions where they could probably use more of an infusion of talent. Um, I mean, again, I wouldn't be opposed to them taking a cornerback early. I think it's a super useful position. Injuries kind of seem to happen there. Jamel Dean has an injury history. That's something you have to take into account. But you did bring back Asante Samuel Jr., and I think, another year removed off injury for him, he could be a much more effective player this season. And he was good in flashes last season, so okay with that. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that it's in the top five just because of what you have in the near future.
Yeah, I think the big, I guess, counterpoint to that or whatever would be Brisker's on a 1-year deal. Eccles, this is his final year coming up here. Ramsey, how much longer are you going to have him? I know he's more of a safety now, but at least has the capability to go down and play corner. Asante Samuel, that was a 1-year deal, right? So,
Yep.
I think the outside corner is hopefully taken care of, but certainly rotational pieces, and really you could make the argument that slot corner is quite a big need. It wouldn't be like, you don't want to draft one in the first round because they're probably not going to play much this year, but, second round, third round, probably, if you get like a Keontae Scott or something like that in the third round, I don't know if he's still going to be there, but that would be a nice value pick to me. Somebody who can really step in and play that nickel right away if needed and be the future of that position. It's just been growing in importance, and the Steelers have kind of been throwing, I don't want to say mud at the wall at the position, but they kind of have been. I mean, you see Beanie Bishop Jr. was there 2 years ago. You had kind of a rotation of guys there last year. Eccles did solidify it a bit. Before that, I mean, it was a mess for a few years, dating back to when I guess Mike Hilton was there. He was solid, but it's just been not a huge emphasis for the Steelers. And I think as the Steelers have kind of deprioritized the position, the NFL has just been like handing out large contracts to nickel corners. And so that's an area where I could see, if one sneaks into the equation there, I could see that happening. Interesting that I think what Ike Taylor was talking to, we'll talk about the Georgia Pro Day stuff in a minute, but I think Ike Taylor was talking to Dalen Everett at the Georgia Pro Day. Have they had, we'll talk about the pre-draft stuff in a second, but I think corner still very well could be in play. The class does fall off after those first 3 rounds, so it kind of has to be early, or I don't know if you really even want to go down that route if you don't get one after the first 2 days. I mean, there might be a 4th rounder or 2 worth considering, but it does get kind of rough. Tight end, another position that deserves mention. Connor Hayward signing with the Raiders. Obviously, Jonnu Smith, no longer on the roster, was released. So really you just have Darnell Washington, Pat Freiermuth. You really need a third. They kind of have 2 distinctly different tight ends now. There's not as much overlap as there was last year. So is tight end something that should be more on our radar than it is right now?
I do think tight end should definitely be on our radar. The one thing about tight end though is I think it was Daniel Jeremiah. He said he has more draftable tight ends in this class than any he can remember. So the one thing is like I think you could take tight end late, maybe 2 tight ends late. I mean, they have 12 picks. We'll see what they do with them if they use them to move up, but they have a lot of picks, so I wouldn't be opposed. You could take a tight end on day 2. There's a lot of talent, but yeah, I think you kind of have your top 2 pretty solidified. If you're looking for a third tight end, whether you want more of a blocker or more of a receiver, there's going to be guys available for you on day 3. So that's kind of where my head's at right now is that I think tight end's a need, but it's not a need you have to, really address early, given that you have Washington. You're probably going to extend your Frymouth you extended 2 years ago. He's got, I think, another 2 years on his deal. So you have those top 2 at least for a little bit, and you can kind of take a guy a little bit later in this draft that could probably still be a pretty productive player in whatever role you need him to play.
All right, let's talk about the pre-draft interest that the Steelers have shown so far, both through the pro day circuit and the pre-draft visitors. So far, the Steelers have had 7 pre-draft visitors out of their allotted 30 that aren't local products. They have 2 additional that are local products that don't count against that limit. Right now, it looks like 2 corners, a defensive lineman, a tight end, an offensive tackle, 2 receivers, a quarterback, and a linebacker. You said something funny about when I floated Carson Beck a couple weeks ago, you had a negative reaction. So what was it like seeing his name pop up on that list?
Still incredibly negative. I was excited to see Chris Johnson come in for a visit, but I mean Carson Beck's arm it's cocked. He doesn't have any arm strength. Like you want to bring in a dink and dunk quarterback, then fine. And Todd McShay had the thing linking the Steelers to Carson Beck. I just don't get it. I really don't get it. But I'm not an NFL talent evaluator, probably for a reason. So I'm not gonna throw too much shade his way. But everything I've seen from Carson Beck late in the season is that his arm's cooked. You look at the last drive of the national championship game; he just had no zip on that deep ball that got picked off to basically end it. Like I don't know what we're really doing here with the Carson Beck interest, but hey, maybe Mike McCarthy can fix him.
Well, today at least the Steelers seem to be checking out another quarterback. Tom Arth, the quarterback coach, is at North Dakota State. Wow, I'm blanking on Cole Payton, the quarterback there. He was at the Senior Bowl. Looked pretty good. This isn't a guy that's going to be like a second, third round pick. This would be more of a fourth arm, camp arm, maybe ends up replacing Mason Rudolph as a developmental guy. That's kind of where he would fit in my mind. But yeah, it's worth mentioning when the position coaches are seen out and about. And the Steelers have done a lot of homework on the quarterback class, and so I'm sure they already liked. Maybe they like what they saw at the Senior Bowl. Maybe he was already on their radar throughout the season. We don't get a lot of reports about where scouts are at the smaller schools, but yeah, he's somebody that's interesting to me. One thing I wanted to mention about Carson Beck, he's 6'4", kind of fits. Something that Jerry Dulac, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, said kind of stuck out to me. He was saying that guys like Garrett Nussmeier and Ty Simpson are not Steelers-type quarterbacks. It's not what they're looking for physically at the position. And he was, more or less saying they're too short. And, I think Ty Simpson's 6'1", a little over 6'1". I think Nussmeier's like 6'2" on the dot. Like I said, Carson Beck's 6'4". And so are they looking for somebody in the mold of like a Ben Roethlisberger, or, well, they already have Will Howard on the roster? Is that what they're kind of looking for? I mean, I don't know how much I buy that from Dulac, to be honest, just because you look at Mike McCarthy's history, Aaron Rodgers, 6'2", Brett Favre, 6'2", Dak Prescott, right around there, a little over 6'2", I think, but it doesn't look like he has a particular type. I mean, to be fair, McCarthy's never really done this before, where he's identified a quarterback and drafted him and developed him that way. And so, anyway, I just thought that was interesting and maybe explains the Carson Beck of it all, because, yeah, I agree. It is an interesting visit otherwise. Any other of the pre-draft visits that you wanted to highlight here?
I think James Thompson's an interesting one just because he's, a big body, kind of like you mentioned him. He might be a little bit too tall. He's 6'6", but he kind of fits the Steelers mold in terms of the arm length. He was good at the Shrine Bowl. He was a guy that, kind of stood out to me there. So that was an interesting one, especially because he's a guy that, didn't get a combine invite. So maybe this is their chance to kind of meet with him. I could see him certainly being a day 3 target. He came in today with Kyle Lewis. So that was one to me that stood out a little bit because it was just an interesting name, kind of off, the traditional radar.
Yeah, and so far, not a ton of surprise positions. I would expect to see certainly we haven't seen any safeties yet, so we'll probably see some of those pop up on the pre-draft list. Probably see another quarterback or two at least. Probably, at least a couple more inside linebackers. Kyle Lewis doesn't count as a local prospect there, but, I would hope that they bring in, Rodriguez from Texas Tech, and maybe a CJ Allen from Georgia, who, Tony Pauline, I guess, linked. I don't know if he necessarily linked. It was kind of a weird, this could be a surprise pick for the Steelers, CJ Allen in the first round. So I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if that's something he kind of heard but didn't want to put his full kind of weight behind that statement. I don't know what to make of that really, but apparently CJ Allen had a nice workout at Georgia, and the Steelers were there in full force. They had Mike McCarthy, his first stop of the pro day circuit as a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was there with Omar Khan. He was there with, as I mentioned earlier, Ike Taylor. I think there was probably some other scouts there as well. I don't have that in front of me, but
Zach Crockett was the other one that we know that was there, I think.
oh yeah, he's usually the SEC guy, so that would make sense. And a lot of prospects worth talking about at Georgia: Monroe Freeland, C.J. Allen, Zachariah Branch, who the Steelers reportedly had a pro day dinner with, Dalen Everett, a kind of second, third round corner, Kristen Miller, Oscar Delp, tight end, super athletic, Colby Young, and there's a good amount of guys to talk about there from Georgia. I think you just wrote about Zachariah Branch,
Yes.
that pro day dinner. What stood out about him?
Yeah, no, he's super interesting because the big knock on him is that he had a limited route tree, but he's a super explosive playmaker type of guy. I mean, Georgia threw him the ball behind the line of scrimmage a lot, kind of just got him the ball in space. And you look at the Steelers' offense last season, with Aaron Rodgers, it was a lot of quick passing game, and I think Zachariah Branch is a guy that fits that offense beautifully. And you look at them, Mike McCarthy, West Coast. even though his route tree wasn't, very expansive, I think he's a guy that could really carve out a solid career. I know our Ryan Pagley compared him to Tank Dell, gave him a long-term starter grade in his scouting report. So, just a super speedy kind of freak athlete type, could also return kicks and punts, something he did in college. So that's an interesting one to me, given that, they have two touch points with him now with the pro day dinner, and they had a formal meeting with him at the combine.
Yeah, and there's a handful of those kick return capable wide receivers worth looking at. The Steelers also had Kendrick Law in from Kentucky. He fits in that mold. Casey Concepcion has some return stuff under his belt. You've got who else? Wetjen. There's one more. Barry and Brown from LSU. There's a handful of those guys all up and down the draft class. I mean, we've been talking about this wide receiver class is deep and has a lot of different skill sets. It just depends what flavor the Steelers want. I would expect them I still think they'll double dip at receiver, and I think one of those receivers will be, more of a return capable guy who has proven they can do that in the past. And so, yeah, Branch is an interesting one in that regard. It also is worth mentioning where certain scouts go. The Steelers have scouts at most pro days, but mentioning where certain guys go, certain kind of heavy hitters within the scouting department. Dan Rooney Jr., the VP of Personnel, was at Clemson and Georgia Tech. Clemson has guys like Antonio Williams. That's another great route running kind of guy. I think he was one of the faster guys in the GPS tracking. I think he tested really well at the combine. We already talked about offensive tackle Blake Miller. So he was there. DeMonte Capehart, that was another guy who tested really well at the combine. Peter Woods, Avion Terrell. I mean, there's a lot of big names at Clemson, so no surprise that he was there. Usually the Steelers send more brass to Clemson. Khan and or Mike Tomlin would go there in the past. That wasn't the case this year, but they still sent Dan Rooney Jr. Georgia Tech is another place he went with Keelan Rutledge, one of my favorite guards in the class, Eric Rivers and Haynes King, the quarterback there. Is there anything else to add from, let's see. Oh, Sheldon White, the last one I wanted to mention, Ted Hurst at Georgia State. That is a very interesting one to me. Sheldon White doesn't hit the circuit too much usually, but Georgia State really only has one prospect worth talking about right now, and that's Ted Hurst. And Ted Hurst is a receiver that we spent a good amount of time talking about after the Senior Bowl. He's got good, height, weight, speed. He made plays at the Senior Bowl. He had great production at a smaller program. Questions about whether that would translate, and it really looked like it would translate at the Senior Bowl. This is a guy I had on my initial mock draft. I can't remember what round, maybe like round 3 I had on a double dip for the Steelers there. He's very intriguing to me. And Sheldon White was there, so that's worth tracking. We'll see. That's a guy I would kind of anticipate them potentially bringing in for a pre-draft visit. So I think that's it for the interest. Do you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, the only thing that's kind of interesting, I mean, they had Mark Sadowski at USC for Mekhi Lemon, Mark Bruner at Washington for Denzel Boston, but a lot of interest on these potentially, day two, maybe even day three type receivers. You mentioned Ted Hurst, Eric Rivers is another one. You look at Georgia with Branch, and Dylan Bell is another guy. He's kind of a versatile. He played a little bit of running back too there, but it kind of interesting that they're doing their due diligence up and down the board at receiver. So if they don't take one in the first round, I would fully anticipate them taking one in the second round. And like you said, I think they're going to double dip.
All right, well, that is it for the topics today. We're going to do a listener question now. If you want to have a question answered on a future episode, 412-254-3145. If I spoke too fast, that is in the show notes as well. So send us a text with your name, or you can call, leave a voicemail. Just tell us your name, where you're from, and a brief question, and we do appreciate all those questions that come in. This one is from Joe in Oregon, who has given us a call or two in the past. Thank you, Joe, for the call, and here it is.
Hey, Depot Divers, this is Joe calling from Oregon. Hope you guys are doing great. Hey, now that we're pretty much done with free agency and we've seen the ads in the defensive backfield, how important is it, do you think, that we draft a safety and a corner both within the first 2 days, day one, day two? So 2 of our first 3 picks versus other needs. Curious to hear how you look at that solution. Thanks.
All right, and I think he tacked something else onto that question here in a separate voicemail, just basically talking about the expiring contracts, which we touched on earlier in the secondary, and the potential holes that could quickly open up if the Steelers don't extend or bring in additional help. So certainly a fair question about the cornerback and safety priorities. We did kind of cover this in depth earlier, but we'll touch on it one more time here. I think he's saying how important is it to bring one in day 1 and 2? And you said 3 picks there, Joe, but the Steelers have actually 5 picks over the first 2 days, so that'll help. I think if they only had 3, the chances of 2 of those 3 being corner and safety would be near 0. But with 5, I could see that happening. I think maybe a 50-50 shot that 2 of those first 5 are corner and safety. I could see that for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's a loaded safety class. I certainly will not be opposed to nabbing one fairly early.
As I said earlier, a slot corner would be my focus right now, especially in that, not very many slot corners are going in the first round. So if you get one in the second or third, that'd be great. The safeties, they tend to be pushed down the draft board a little bit too. Just devalued for whatever reason. We talked about that a few weeks ago where guys like, Minkah Fitzpatrick, I think was the highest drafted safety of the last, several years. And he was, I want to say 11th overall or something like that. And so you're probably going to see that be beaten this year with Caleb Downs, and maybe even Dylan Thieneman. But yeah, I think there's safeties to be had in the, second, third round, especially getting down to pick 99, I think is the Steelers' last pick of day 2, all the way down almost into the 4th round, one of the comp picks they were awarded. So there are opportunities for sure. Thank you for the question, Joe in Oregon. We hope you will give us a call back. Again, 412-254-3145 for your question to be answered on a future episode. I'm Ross, that's Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.